Thank you very much, Stu. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to this warm context on this very, very cold day. As I understand, it is going to get much colder between now and the time that we are going to leave the shul. So a very special, an extra special and warm welcome to all of you. I would like to start by offering thanks on behalf of the Azriel Institute of Israel Studies to the synagogue, to your community, to the community here at ADATH Israel, and in particular to Rabbi Michael Whitman and Stu, who were so wonderfully ready and eagerly interested in hosting this series of lectures dedicated to Israel at the Post 2019. I would also like to add a very special thank you to Sammy and Brenda Gewürz, who were graciously offered to sponsor the event. As a result of their generosity, we have the wonderful refreshments, and the publicity and the advertisement also found its way into the Canadian Jewish news. And last but certainly not least, a very heartfelt and warm thank you to Jule and Lazar Sarna for their selfless hospitality that I've been enjoying during my stay in Montreal, which is going to be very short. In less than 48 hours, God willing, I will be on the flight back to Israel just to get back into the full hustle and bustle of the election season. And if everything goes according to plan, on March 25th, when we meet again, I will be able to bring more up-to-date news from the streets of Eretz Israel as the country is preparing for yet another exercise in electoral democracy. What I would like to do today as a way of a quick introduction is to say a few words about the topic for the second class, and also offer a very, very quick recap of some of the main points that we covered last time. So unfortunately, to those of you, maybe fortunately, to those of you who didn't suffer through the first class with me, maybe you're lucky because you suffer one less lecture with the professor. But there are a couple of important points that I would like to tease out and put back on the slide as a way of contextualizing where we were on January 30th and where we are going to be headed with this class today. So the topic of today's lecture, today's class, is the new right and the future of religious Zionism. The New Right is, of course, a new political party, one of the new political parties running in the 2019 Knesset elections. And here in the top left-hand corner of the slide, you see what has become a viral image of two politicians who entered and served throughout the previous Knesset, the 20th Knesset, as members of the Jewish Home Party. As a matter of fact, the gentleman on my right, on her left, is Naftali Bennett, the Minister of Education, formerly Minister of Diaspora Affairs, and also formerly leader of the Jewish Home Party. Just days after the announcement of the new elections, decided to split and leave the Jewish Home together with the number two, the second highest ranking member of that party in Parliament, Ayelet Shaked, Minister of Justice. So I would like to devote this class today to this particular political party, to the important niche that this party is seeking to fill in the party system. But I'm not doing this because I have particular affinity towards the policies that they espouse. As a good academic, I should try to close and hide as much as possible my own personal political feelings. So hopefully you will not find out where I stand politically by the end of this class. But there is a very important reason why we should talk about this political party, and that reason is here in the subtitle, if you will, of the talk. Because the New Right seems to offer, and by way of a thesis for today's class, this is what I would like to advance, that the New Right, this new political formation, seems to be offering an alternative conceptualization and strategy for rebuilding religious Zionism in the Israeli party system. Religious Zionism, one of the oldest movements within Zionist politics that seem to have fallen into very, very difficult times. In the 18th Knesset elections in 2009, the party suffered its worst electoral performance. The Jewish Home Party, representing religious Zionism, picking up only 3 seats. Since then, however, under the leadership of Naftali Bennett, there seems to be a new beginning, a new face, a whole new outlook to rethinking religious Zionism on the Israeli party scene. And the reason why I think it's worthwhile focusing on the new right is really to see how this old foundational movement finds its reawakening, if you will, today in Israel. So, as I promised, a very quick recap. So this is the plan for the session today. I'm going to offer just really in a couple of minutes a review of two important points from our last class. Then I will provide a somewhat detailed, but hopefully informative overview of how the new right, this new political party, came into being. And this review of the genesis of the new right is also going to show us some very important sides to the operation of this very complex thing called the Israeli party system. Then I will situate the new right in the broader context of the history, the electoral and legislative history of religious Zionism, in order trying to convince you that what I suggested a few minutes ago is actually correct. The new right is a new face to religious Zionism, and we need to appreciate the formation of this new party in that broader context. I will discuss then the ideology, the leadership, and the electoral base of this new formation. And then, as I promised last time, towards the end, so in the last 10 minutes or so in each class, we are going to be looking at other related current developments on the election scene. In particular, I will highlight some of the recent events that have taken place in the election season. Several new parties chose new leaders. Several parties had internal primaries to choose their candidates for the Knesset election. And those are all very important pieces of information for us as we move forward. So without further ado, let me just show you two slides from the previous class. And this was one of them. The thesis for last class was the following, if I could summarize the thesis briefly. While there is a cacophony and a seemingly bewildering array of political parties in Israel, in the Knesset, and certainly in the electoral competition, and while political parties seem to be splitting up and new political parties seem to be being offered to the Israeli voter at a bewildering pace, there is something very stable to the way in which the main political alternatives are offered and have been offered to the Israeli voter. And I think it's very helpful to think about the Israeli party system in terms of these 5 poles or 5 blocks, which have been very, very stable. And really, genuine political competition in Israel has taken place in terms of these different poles trying to control sometimes a coalition of 2 or 3 of them, sometimes another coalition or 2 or 3 of them succeeding at winning political power and governing the country. So, for the first several decades after independence, after the formation of the State of Israel, of course, the left pole, led by Mapai, eventually becomes metamorphoses into the Israeli Labor Party, governed very successfully in a broad coalition that sometimes included some parties in the center, almost always, in fact, always including some parties from the Orthodox religious camps. But certainly for the past several decades, we witness the ascendance, the political ascendance of the right. So please remember that the 5 poles, the 5 blocks, provide a very stable anchoring, if you will, to the Israeli party system. But then, this is right. It's going to get much better. Center, left, Arab parties, and Orthodox religious parties. The second thesis, if you will, to the class last week, was that while the poles and the blocks are stable, the Israeli electoral system is such that it allows and it makes it very easy for political entrepreneurs to form new political parties within each of these blocks. So the actual identity, the actual parties that make up the right, that have made up the center, that have made up the left, and so forth, has changed considerably over time. And this current election is no exception to that. So some of the political parties that have been announced, that have entered the fray of competition specifically for this electoral race 2019 include the New Right, which we are going to be talking more about today, the Resilient Israel or Resilience to Israel led by Benny Gantz. We will talk more about this particular party and where it's headed in the next lecture. Gesher, a political party led by Orly Levy, who entered the last Knesset as the second highest ranking candidate of Yisrael Beitenu. This is the political party led by Avigdor Lieberman. She's also a former model and a fashion model, but more importantly, or just as importantly, a daughter to former Foreign Minister David Levy. And then many of you may have heard about the new political party led by former Defense Minister Bughi Ya'alon, Telem, which recently, since we had our last lecture, actually merged together with Benny Gantz's political party. So let me just recap the theses from the last class. Lots of new political parties, but 5 seemingly stable poles and anchors providing stability to the basic structure of the political system. And now, without further recapping, let me turn our analytical and intellectual eyes and attention to the formation of the new right. And the story starts in November of last year, November 2018, when Avigdor Lieberman, then Minister of Defense, whose political party joined Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition late. When Prime Minister Netanyahu formed his coalition after the last election, 4 years ago, Avigdor Lieberman was not part of that coalition. He drove a hard bargain. The coalition could still be formed without him. About a year and a half later, he entered, thus bringing important new mandates and seats to the coalition. And he became Minister of Defense. In November of 2018, he had a major fallout with the Prime Minister. He fundamentally disagreed with what he perceived a very cautious approach to handling the looming security threat that Israel was facing from vis-à-vis the Gaza Strip. In particular, when Hamas unleashed a terrifyingly large and unprecedented arsenal of rockets, primitive as they were, but still many of them reached far and deep into Israel in response to a botched Israeli security operation within the Strip. Lieberman demanded swift and decisive action against Hamas. And the Prime Minister disagreed. He didn't want to go to war. He didn't want to take a harsher line. At which point Lieberman said, so be it. I'm leaving the cabinet and my party is leaving the coalition. Please remember, without Lieberman, the coalition could still remain in power. In the first place, he wasn't there. And indeed, when Lieberman leaves the coalition, Netanyahu still has the Prime Minister 61, the barest possible majority out of 120 Knesset seats at his disposal. But Naftali Bennett, the leader of the Jewish Home Party, his Minister of Education, steps up and offers a tremendous challenge because Naftali Bennett wants to be the new Minister of Defense and tells Netanyahu that unless you appoint me as the new Minister of Defense, we are also leaving the coalition and there will have to be new elections at the time of our choosing. And for a Prime Minister to risk that, to actually let go of the control that he would normally have to time the dispersal and the calling of a new election is a tremendous loss of strategic initiative. And it wasn't clear for several days just exactly what would happen. A few days later, having consulted with his own political party, and you can see members of the Jewish Home faction both to their sides, but also having consulted with important intellectuals such as Nobel laureate Robert Aumann from the Hebrew University, a Nobel laureate in economics and game theory. People advised Naftali Bennett, don't do that. Don't bring the government down. It's not good for you to enter and be the cause of a new election. And so in what came across as a major, seemingly major loss of face, Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, these are the two leaders of the party, call a press conference, and a few days after, they retract their ultimatum. Naftali Bennett openly announces that he understands that at some point, he was going to have to pay a major political price for this. It didn't come across as responsible political leadership to threaten bringing down the government and just a few days later being told by other members of his own political party in the Knesset that that was something not to be done. But no sooner had he done that, together with Ayelet Shaked and this lady, Shuri Moalem, the three of them call another press conference to announce the formation of a new political party. According to Israeli law, within 90 days of the next election, you can form a new political party without penalties. If you form a new political party before the 90-day period, there are significant penalties that politicians have to be aware of, but that didn't apply. Moreover, it's important to note, and briefly we discussed it last time, it mattered that there were three politicians forming this new party, because if you have at least 1/3 of your parliamentary party caucus forming a new party, you are eligible to receive important funds from the state. And three of them were more than 1/3 of the 8-member Jewish Home faction. So these were Naftali Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, and Shuri Moalem. Those of you who are Knesset junkies, and I hope that many of you will become Knesset junkies by the end of the lecture series, I do encourage you to go on the Knesset website, and unfortunately, you do have to, fortunately or unfortunately, you do have to know Hebrew in order to read some of these documents. Go and check out the minutes of the Knesset committee that decided to give approval to the formation of this new committee. The meeting of the Knesset committee took place on December 30th, 2018, and something fascinating was revealed. It was revealed during the discussions that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked had actually planned their exit from the party as early as August. In other words, what came across, and certainly that's what you would see widely reported in the media, what came across and what seemed to many of us observers of the Israeli political scene as a reaction to Netanyahu's seeming inability to engage the Hamas threat and his unwillingness to offer Bennett what he asked for, the Ministry of Defense. That wasn't the case. It seemed that these three politicians had been planning their exit already going back to August. And if there are any questions about what they actually did in the summer of 2018, I will leave the details to the Q&A. Now, so here we have a new political party, the New Right, that very quickly, immediately, as soon as it's formed, says that we are a party of religious Zionism. And it's important now to spend a little bit of time on going back and seeing and appreciating the formation of this new party in the broader context, historical context of religious Zionism in Israel. This is a movement that, of course, goes back to the early 20th century. Rabbi Yitzhak Yaakov Reines was the founder of the Mizrahi movement, out of which the Mizrahi, thereafter Hapoel HaMizrahi, and the National Religious Party will eventually be formed. It's important to note that unlike many Orthodox religious Jews who rejected Herzlian Zionism early on, the Zionism of Theodor Herzl, of course, the Mizrahi movement doesn't. And he, in particular, the founder of the movement, participated in every single Zionist Congress, starting with the third. So it's important to know that when we think of religious Zionism, we really think of a political movement that emphasizes the importance of giving Jewish content to the state of Israel, while also being very strongly committed to the Zionist enterprise. Not every religious Orthodox party, of course, in Israel does that. And that's one of the key differences that separates the national religious and the religious Zionist movement from the other Orthodox parties, the relationship and whose relationship to Zionism is much more difficult and much more troubled. It's also important to note that from early on, the national religious and the religious Zionist movement did have a very strong emphasis on education. And Reines in particular, of course, started one of the early yeshivot back in Belarus and Congress Poland, where in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, where he already emphasized the incorporation of secular curriculum in the traditional religious learning and that would take place in the yeshiva. And that's something that later Mizrahi and later religious Zionist politicians would continue to uphold. So it's important for us to remember that religious Zionism is an old, one of the foundational streams in the Zionist movement, in the history and the annals of Zionism. And we need to see the formation of the new right in that broader context. Now, having said that, the next slide is probably, if you are tempted to fall asleep because it is warm and I am speaking monotonously, I think the next slide is going to wake you up. So please. As important and long-standing as religious Zionism and its parties have been in the Israeli party system, they have always been characterized by great institutional and organizational instability. In the first Knesset, there seemed to be unity of action and effort. The United Religious Front became one of the largest parties in the first Knesset. Thereafter, however, it quickly split between the Mizrahi and the Hapoel HaMizrahi factions. And by the third Knesset, once again, they are reunited. And they remain united as such. Mafdal, or the National Religious Party, remains the united party of religious Zionism from the third until the 16th Knesset. The 16th Knesset, of course, is a pivotal turning point. It's a critical juncture, if you will, in the history of Israel. This is the time of Ariel Sharon and the disengagement of Gaza. So we are talking about 2005, 2006. Mafdal, like Likud, like a number of other parties, do not come out of the crisis of disengagement without damage. And look what happens right thereafter. First, the two leaders of Mafdal, two men by the name of Yitzhak Levi and Efi Eitam, again, the leaders of the party leave to form a new movement called Mafdal Hadash, the renewed religious Zionism, only to merge with the National Union, which then merges and metamorphoses into the first incarnation of the Jewish home, out of which three new parties are formed. Achi, Moledet Kuma, and National Union, yet another amalgamation of right-wing politicians, and another version of the Jewish home carrying in its name the National Religious Mafdal label, only to remerge again in 2008 into the Jewish Home Party. It is this last incarnation of the Jewish home from which Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked just 2 months ago split away from. So what do we need to take away from this slide? That while there was organizational stability until 2005, 2006, since the disengagement from Gaza, the national religious movement in religious Zionism is looking for some kind of an stable expression for these old ideas and values that have been so important in the history of the movement and have been so central and integral, in fact, to the history of Israeli statehood. So in that regard, the fact that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked enterprised and formed this new political party is really nothing new. It fits the pattern of the last decade and a half, if you will. Now, the electoral performance of the national religious parties in Israel, not surprisingly so, mirror this tremendous organizational instability. While between the first and the 9th Knesset, the party seems to be, the National Religious Party seems to be doing fairly well, never really dropping under 10 Knesset seats. These are the Knessets, from the first to the current one, to the last one, and these are the number of seats that they performed. There starts a decline after the election of 1977. 1977 is, of course, the turning point in Israeli politics. This is where, for the first time, Menachem Begin's Likud party wins an election, not in terms of a majority, but winning enough the largest number of seats and forming a new political party. So you are perfectly justified to raise your eyebrows. Why is it? How do we understand that religious Zionism and the National Religious Party actually starts declining and slipping in terms of its electoral success when the right is on the ascent? Well, the answer has to do with the rise of a new movement in Israeli politics that many of you may have heard about, called Gush Emunim. In 1974, Gush Emunim, the organization, a movement informed by the views of the son of Harav Kook, and espousing and stressing the importance of the settlement enterprise, starts siphoning important votes and seats away from the religious Zionist movement. So that's going to be one of the important questions that the new right itself today is going to be confronted with. How to deal with the growing radicalization of the movement, how to deal with the demands of the settlement and the settler community that started to weaken the electoral base of the party as early as the 1977 elections. And the rest of the story between 1977 and the 2009 elections really is just an expression of the instability that we already showed and we already saw on the previous slide. In the 2009 elections, this is that historic elections when the National Religious Party, now carrying the Jewish home label, is at its deep point. Only 3 seats. Under the leadership of a mathematician, a professor, and president of Bar-Ilan University, Daniel Herskovich, the party only is able to pick up 3 seats in the Knesset. It is at that point that Naftali Bennett enters the scene and eventually is going to turn the party around. So more about that in a minute. In spite of the ebbs and flows of the electoral performance of Mafdal and the different parties that came to define religious Zionism in Israel, this is an extremely important point also to take home from this lecture. The National Religious Party, or its different parties that made up this alternative in the party system, were always integral to the various Israeli governments and coalitions. Today, the last government that we see in Israel that just finished its term is the 34th. Mafdal, its predecessors and its successors participated in 31 out of these 34 governments. Sometimes for the full duration of the term, sometimes for a few months, sometimes the party went in and out. It depended really on the coalition, on the nature and the challenges of the coalitions that were in power at the time. But please remember the important point that religious Zionism has always been central and integral to the various Israeli governments. The only governments that didn't include these parties were the 2 governments formed by Yitzhak Rabin in the 13th Knesset, and that's the Knesset which passes the Oslo Accords. So it's important to remember that the Oslo Accords were passed through Knesset by governments that didn't include the religious Zionist community's political representatives, and in the 17th Knesset, Ehud Olmert's coalition government. I'm going to skip that slide, but we can definitely come back to a footnote, which I like talking about, but it's really not central to the presentation in the history of the religious Zionist movement. I do want to show you this slide, however, to give you a sense of, and now we are starting to emphasize the new face and the new vision that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked seem to be offering to religious Zionism. Let's look at the leaders of the religious Zionist parties since the inception of the State of Israel. Chaim Moshe Shapira serves at the helm of the party for a very long time until the early 1970s, followed by Yosef Burg, Zevulun Hammer, Yitzhak Levy, Efi Eitam, Zevulun Orlev, Daniel Herskovich, and then Naftali Bennett. What's common to this slide? Amen. And what's changing? The leaders of the new party, this is a dual joint leadership. And this message, the importance of encouraging women, conservative, religious, Zionist women, to come and take an important role, leadership role in rethinking religious Zionism, is central to the formation and the message that the new party sends out. Now, what are the policies? What are the policies that the new right is promising, and what are the main points on which the platform of the new party seems to be emerging in the electoral season? The first one has to do with political institutions, and in every speech, in every interview you listen to that's conducted with the 2 leaders of the party, you will see this coming up, and we already engaged this last time. Parliament is sovereign, and in a parliamentary democracy, which is what Israel is, the courts, certainly since 1992, have been exercising and putting way too much limit on the ability of the Knesset to genuinely legislate and govern the country. And the courts need to be reined in. So, and certainly during her term as Justice Minister, Ayelet Shaked already made a number of important steps in that direction. Second, religion and state. Every time Shaked and Bennett are asked about what will you do about conversion? What will you do about the law of return? What will you do about all the questions that stem from the debate on can Israel be Jewish and democratic at the same time? The platform of the party points back to an important program that was published in 2003, a program called the Gavison-Medan Covenant. It's a program, and I do encourage you, you can read it in English if you go on the website of the Israel Democracy Institute. It's, the document in English is about 112 pages, but very, very informative. In Hebrew, it's quite a bit longer. Ruth Gavison, a law professor, almost Supreme Court judge, but eventually didn't make it. And Yaakov Medan, an educator from the Gush, put together the program, a program that calls for alterations and important changes to the status quo agreement under which the relationship between religion and state since 1947 have been conducted. Some of the elements, some of the important points, if you will, in the Gavison-Medan Covenant include recognition, a broader recognition of converts, not just those who are undergoing conversion through the Orthodox Batei Din, as well as the establishment of clear laws about how the relationship between religion and state should be conducted. And there, the central point that both Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked emphasize is to reduce the degree of what they call religious coercion. So they seem to be offering quite a bit of sensitivity to some of the concerns that are coming up and emerging on the Israeli political scene from the less religiously orthodox communities of the conservative camp. On the Palestinian issue, the party is very unequivocal. We want to annex Area C of the West Bank. Under the Oslo Accords, the West Bank was divided into 3 parts. Area C is the largest part, where most of the Jewish settlements are. And the party, both of these politicians and all the candidates who are interviewed about this issue are unequivocal that they are opposed to the creation of a Palestinian state. They are in favor of, if you will, a one-state solution, which would mean the annexation of Area C, with the possibility of offering full Israeli citizenship to Palestinians who would obviously be included in this enlarged Israel. And on women in politics, let me just finish on this bullet point, and I will come back to you, sir, in a moment. Let me just go back and stress again the importance that the party attaches to bringing in and recruiting women, and you will see that in a moment much more visually and visibly demonstrated in political life. Before I would turn it over to the gentleman for a question, let me stress the profound significance of this last point. The important emphasis that the party plays on encouraging women to be part of this movement. In all the years between 1949, since the first Knesset election, until the last Knesset election, so imagine 19 Knessets, how many female members did the different national religious parties had in the Knesset? How many Knesset members? Make a guess. Okay, more than 0. 3. Since 1949 until 2015, 3 women, 3 different individual female politicians made it. That is going to change rapidly when it comes to the new right. And just look at the emergence of the new candidate team that they are putting forward. Immediately after the formation, I'm sorry, let me just pause for a moment. Sir, you had a question. Yes, Justice Minister.
Justice Shaket stated that Zone C, the Palestinian population is approximately 400,000 to 500,000 Palestinians, and they have absolutely no problem giving them Israeli citizenship. It seems a little, that would increase the Arab population, as we're looking in Israel, by approximately 10%. Now that seems like quite a bit. And I think Israel's got a lot of problems and a lot of issues, but doing that would definitely open the floodgates to many more.
Thank you. Let me engage the question after I'm done with the formal presentation, but thank you very much for raising it, and we will give perhaps priority to your question when I'm done, and so definitely the question is not ignored. That's the point I want to stress. We'll come back right to it as soon as I'm done. So let's take a quick look at the emerging team. The first candidate that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked recruited to join them and who accepted very quickly is Caroline Glick, an Anglo-Israeli, very well-known publicist, writes regular columns in the Jerusalem Post, and her reach to the English language audience, conservative audience, is going to promise to bring a lot of support to the party. But then you also have political non-entities, if you will, or individuals with no prior significant public affairs engagement. And this gentleman, Matan Kahana, is a former army buddy of Naftali Bennett's, who eventually became a fighter pilot. And, well, politics is also about bringing in people that you can trust. Shirley Pinto, the first ever deaf candidate running for a Knesset mandate. The first ever deaf candidate. If you haven't done so yet, please go on YouTube, look at her campaign clip. It's very short, it's very much worth looking at. It's all in sign language, of course. There is some dubbing in the background, but it's quite instructive to see what she says about how her constituency fits into the rethinking of religious Zionism, a broader Zionism. Eliashiv Reiner from Yeruham joined the party as a candidate only this morning, our time, late last night in Israel. I only put his picture up during the course of today because I got the news really very recently. A few hours, in the early dawn hours of Monday morning. But probably the new candidate who many of you might have heard about over the last week or so is Alona Barkat. Alona Barkat, you can see her here, you can see her during the press conference in the company of Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, and you can see her here in the company of not fans, but players of the soccer team Hapoel Beersheva. The soccer team from the periphery of the southern part of Israel that so unexpectedly started winning Israeli soccer championships going back for the last 3 to 4 years now. Alona Barkat is the owner of the team. She is also sister-in-law to Nir Barkat, former mayor of Jerusalem. She married Nir Barkat's brother. Her decision to accept Naftali Bennett's and Ayelet Shaked's invitation in and of itself is remarkable, because here you have a successful entrepreneur, female, well-known Israeli, who is bringing a face to religious Zionism, the conservative national religious constituency that we really hadn't seen before on the Israeli electoral scene. But Beersheva is important for another reason. And I apologize for the Hebrew, but these are the electoral results from the last election from Beersheva itself. The Jewish Home Party didn't do particularly well. They only picked up 6,782 votes. Beersheva is important because of this. Likud. This is a Likud vote-rich area of the country. 36,000 people in Beersheva voted for Likud. And now, Alona Barkat, who is very much loved, whose name is a brand known all over the city, and you could see the images. The love and the affection that is expressed for her is not limited to the soccer players. You have to remember, for Beersheba to become the national champion was a major thing. This fact, the fact that Barkat is a member of the new team, is also an attack on the Likud base, on the Likud constituency here in Beersheba. I'm going to, because the time is of the essence, I'm going to skip these clips, but I do want to show you this. Politics remains fundamentally still local, and where you are known locally is very important because people do vote, people do express attachments to individually, locally known leaders. And you're absolutely right. This is not going to get, 36,000 votes is not going to get the new right many seats. But this is going to be an important foray into the Beersheba electorate. Not in terms of seats, because there is no constituency there, but it is an attack. It is a significant number of votes that can come even from there. Yeah. So let me come back to that in more detail if that wasn't satisfactory. I do want to show you this picture again because to stress the importance of, if you will, the appeal to women in the Israeli party scene. And this picture comes from a poll that was reported at the beginning of the month in the Globus Journal, which regularly asks this question: who is the most valuable, not player, but politician in Israel? And of course, some of you might recognize these politicians. Miri Regev, a minister from the Minister for Cultural Affairs and Sports in the outgoing Likud government. This is Ayelet Shaked, Minister of Justice. This is Orly Levy, the leader of the new Gesher party. And this is Gila Gamliel, Minister for Equal Opportunities. I believe that's the exact name of the portfolio. And look at this. The most significant margin, the most valuable, if you will, female politician according to the poll is Ayelet Shaked. And it is not surprising that the party puts her in a very frontal positioning in every campaign speech, in every campaign literature, in the social media that you see. As a matter of fact, you see her presence during the electoral campaign is quite a bit more pronounced than that of Naftali Bennett's. Now, how is the new right doing in the public opinion polls leading up to the elections? I'm showing on this slide the expected and the predicted number of seats. So these are the number of seats of the party that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked left behind, so Jewish Home. And these are the dates. So in the middle of the month of January, the Jewish Home, and for the next several weeks, was predicted to pick up about 4 seats. That's as minimally above the threshold as it gets. And then in the beginning of the month of February, there was a slight increase. And ever since then, the expected predicted numbers that the Jewish Home will pick up are on the decline. And according to the most recent polls, there are grave doubts that Jewish Home without Bennett and Shaked would even cross the threshold. But that's not the story of the new right. Right? Although there is some up and down that you see in the expected and predicted seat shares of the new party, there is also a marked increase. And according to the last polls, and I'm going to show that in a few minutes, that upward inclination of the slope actually continues. So it seems that there is an electoral payoff. It seems that according to the polls, and they may very well change quite significantly between now and 49 days later when the election actually is held, it seems that right now, Ayelet Shaked and Naftali Bennett have been reading the mood of the public, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop here with regard to discussing the new right. And let me spend the next couple of minutes just to give you an overview of some of the recent developments that have taken place on the electoral landscape since our last lecture. Sami. Not at all. Not at all. No. No, so the Haredi parties have come to an agreement to run together, and that couldn't be taken for granted. So Degel HaTorah and Agudat Yisrael will be running again together, but we have 2 more days for them to change their minds if they do. But every indication points to the fact that they will be running again as United Torah Judaism. And they are, you will see in a few minutes, they are expected to pick up somewhere, depending on the poll, 6 to 7 seats. That they are definitely not part of this movement at all. As you see from the images and as you see from the policies, this new party, the new right, really wants to offer a bridge between religious Zionism and secular conservative Zionism. So if you will, the answer that the new right offers to the crisis that we documented earlier, the electoral slippage of the national religious movement, is to bring the movement closer to the center, so that even people like Ayelet Shaked and the constituency that she represents would find a meaningful home in the party and its following. So let's look at some of the important developments that have taken place over the last 3 weeks. On the right, so in the constituency that Ayelet Shaked and Naftali Bennett left behind, we saw the National Union Party, so that was one of the constituents of the Jewish Home, choosing Bezalel Smotrich, a very radical, outspoken member of the previous Jewish Home parliamentary faction, being elected as party leader. And just a couple of days ago, he entered into a pact with the new leader of the Jewish Home Party. So you see, the departure of Bennett and Shaked created a lot of repercussions, led to a lot of repercussions in the party they left behind. A new leader in one constituency, new leader in the other constituency, but the Jewish Home, as we knew it, is going to run again together as a union of the Jewish Home proper and the National Union. Likud, the political party of the Prime Minister, of the current Prime Minister, had its internal primary elections. Many parties, certainly not all of them, but a good number of Israeli parties have internal candidate primaries. Of course, the party leader didn't participate in the primaries. There is no need for him to stand for election at this point in time. What's important to note about the this is the result of the internal Likud list, and you see Netanyahu leading the list. This is the number 2 candidate, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. The point I would like to ask you to zero in on, and there's no need, but we can certainly get into the specific details of the individual members in the Q&A, that the top 20 names are all established Likud politicians, with many of them having already served at least one, some of them several terms in government. So Likud came out of the internal primary exercise with offering to its voters a reasonable degree of stability and continuity. Yuli Edelstein, who received the highest number of votes in the primaries, is the Speaker of the Knesset, a very established former refusnik and a very important member of the Israeli conservative constituency. Yisrael Katz, some of you may have picked up the news this morning that he was appointed as acting foreign minister now that Prime Minister Netanyahu ceded that portfolio at least until the elections. So we are really looking at a number of very established seasoned politicians. And the same applies to Avodah, to the Israeli Labor Party, which, as we discussed last time, severed its connections and cut its ties with Tzipi Livni's Hatnua. The Labour Party also had its internal primaries, and certainly if you look at the first 9 names, and if you look at the next 9 names on the list, you see a number of well-known faces already from the party. Again, the party's leader, Avi Gabay, doesn't have to stand for election. It's important to point out that Stav Shafir, Shali Yachimovich, a former leader of the party, Amir Peretz, another former leader of the party, Merav Michaeli, the granddaughter of Israel Kastner, the Hungarian Schindler are also very, very prominent politicians who were re-elected. So to high positions on the list. So seemingly the Labour Party, like Likud, is also appealing to its base with a message of stability and continuity, as does Meretz. Meretz was the more recent one of the sort of mainstream political parties concluding its internal primaries. And according to the polls, Meretz is right now expected to win about 4 seats. And the top 4 names, of course, the new leader of the party, Tamar Zandberg, who replaced Zava Galon during the previous Knesset. And the next 3 names on the list are all current members of the Knesset. So Meretz, Likud, and Avodah all seem to be coming out of their internal primaries with a message of stability and continuity. But not her. You may have seen the news this morning that Tzipi Livni, after having been so unceremoniously let go, if you will, from the Zionist camp by Labor leader Avi Gabay. This morning, this morning our time, she announced that according to the polls, there was really no chance that her party, Hatnua, would be passing the threshold. And since there was no interest coming from any of the major parties to incorporate her and put her high on any of the other mainstream parties' list, Tzipi Livni announced her resignation and departure from this electoral race. And I think that also ends the end of her political career. Of course, it may be too soon to say. Politicians have come back before, but her political career has been marked by a number of party switches, if you will. I mean, she really has moved from party to party on a number of occasions. It's just not clear if there is another mainstream party where that would be left for her to go. So I think, and most commentators seem to agree, that her departure from this electoral race is also her exit from the Israeli electoral and party scene. Okay, I think I'm down to the last 2 slides. In fact, I know I'm down to the last 2 slides, so please just bear with me for another couple of minutes. Let's take a look at the changes that have taken place in the Israeli public opinion since our last meeting, which was on January 30th. So these are, of course, the parties, more or less in the order of their expected seat shares as of the January 30 polls. So you'll see that Likud is at the top of the list, all the way to Hatnua, which is now out, and Ahmed Tibi's one of the Arab parties called Tal. So let's see. On January 30th, and again, we saw this in our first class, Likud was leading with a significant enough margin over Benny Gantz's resilience. Yesh Atid continued to hover around 10, 11 seats. And the new right, as we saw from the earlier slide, was expected to get about 6 seats at the time. Now, as the last poll that I saw before putting the slide together was dated on the 13th of February. So let's look at some of the changes. Not much change over here. Not a lot of change over here, but there are 2 important changes that I would like to highlight. One is here. So the new right seems to be on the ascent. And that's important to consider when you look at what's happening to the Jewish home, the party that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked left behind. According to the last polls, so February 13th, the Jewish home is not expected to be in the next Knesset, whereas the new right is expected to be in the next Knesset with seats more than what the previous poll suggested. So polls change, but right now what we can tell from this is that there is some indication of some voters moving from the Jewish home to the new right. Nobody's expecting Moshe Feiglin's party to make the Knesset. So yeah, it's possible. It's possible that Zechut might make it, but it's the only polls that are reporting his are the polls that are published by Israel Hayom. And even there, the numbers are just very, very marginal. So it's not clear at all. Not clear at all. It's possible that Feiglin may make it to the Knesset if in the last minutes he enters an electoral alliance with the Jewish Home and the National Union. But on its own, right now, the polls don't suggest that he will make it. And the second point I would like to highlight is this. Look at the Labour Party. So while Benny Gantz's party seems to be hovering around 20, the Labour Party seems to be registering a significant increase. And perhaps that's something that we might see in the next 49 days between now and the elections. It's not impossible at all that some Labour voters who see the stability and the continuity that the new Labour list, which we looked at, offers to them, might just decide that, heck, we really don't know Benny Gantz. We really don't know much about this new party. Maybe we should be betting on the older horse of the left, if you will, which might give us more stability. The last slide. What does it mean in terms of the coalition? Please remember that, on this slide, I want to just zero in on the parties that made up the outgoing right-wing, center-right, I should say, coalition. And I'm cheating a little bit, but at least I will be open about the cheating. So on this slide, I'm going to show you how many seats the coalition members had when the Knesset was disbanded and the new election was called. So we'll look at Likud, we'll look at the new right, we'll look at the Haredi parties, United Torah Judaism, Kulanu, we'll look at Shas. In brackets, I indicate Avigdor Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu, although their departure from the coalition actually triggered, if you will, the chain reaction leading up to new elections. But they were there for a long time as part of the coalition, so I'll include them, and I'll include the Jewish Home. So at the time of the dissolution of the Knesset, these were the numbers. Likud with 30 seats, the new right, the 3 politicians who formed it, and so on and so forth. According to the polls that were taken on January 30th, that we looked at earlier, this was the change. So the Jewish Home started suffering a little bit. The important changes that we saw between the end of December and the end of January took place here. The new right rising and Kulanu dropping. And remember what we said in last class about political parties in the center? That's the part of the Israeli party system where parties often come and go. So perhaps Kulanu is going to suffer that eventual fate as well. And according to the last polls that we looked at, the trend continues. Likud seemingly going strong. 30 seats expected is expected by the party to be won. The new right continues its very marked steady ascent, and Kulanu continues to mark its steady descent. So perhaps the new right is picking up successfully votes away from Kulanu, votes of secular Israelis who are conservative, who are Zionist, who are secular, but who are conservative on all those issues that the new right is also conservative and wants to get their support. So I am going to stop here, but before I would do that, I would like to again say a big thank you to those of you who chose to spend this extremely cold February evening talking about Israeli electoral democracy. Once again, a huge thank you to the Kehilat ADATH Yisrael. Very special thank you to Brenda and Sami Gewürz for their sponsorship and for all your friendship for being here tonight. Please, if you have nothing better to do, or if you continue to be teased and interested, come back on March 25th. We will know an awful lot more by then about the state of the mood of the Israeli public. We will be just 2 weeks before and away from the next elections. Everything, all the information at our fingertips will be much more meaningful in that regard, in the sense of their immediacy. If you have any questions between now and then, please don't be shy. If you would like to get copies of the slides, or if you want to chat or talk about any aspect of the presentation, or if you just want to engage me on any issue that has to do with Israeli politics today, please. Well, I'm not giving you the phone number because email is so much easier, and I will be in Israel for most of the time between now and then. Send me an email. I would certainly love to hear from you. I would be privileged if you showed interest. And failing that, let me open the floor for a Q&A. And I'm reminded that if you have a question, just please walk up to the microphone that's here in the middle, or maybe I can pass the microphone if it's easier. So, Jack? 2
short questions. There is a follow the Israeli news, and they're talking about the possibility that Yesh Atid will get together with the Resilience Party, and that together, the combined number of votes is surpassing now the Likud's. I know there were some issues between Lapid and Gantz, but what's your take on this? That's one question. And the second is, where does the Resilience Party take the votes from? I saw 20 votes on your 20 mandates on your slide, so I was wondering where do they come from? At the expense of which parties? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with respect to the first question, the parties really have only a day and a half left to finalize their decisions about forming an electoral alliance, forming a joint list or not. And it's not clear at all at this point if Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz are going to form a new party or are going to be running together or not. You're absolutely right, Jack, that there are polls that suggest that running together, they might be able to trump, if you will, Likud. But please remember that there are all kinds of other scenarios. There are scenarios out there according to which an electoral combination of Likud, Kulanu, and the New Right would win at least 40 seats, not more. So we don't, right now, a day and a half before the deadline, none of these electoral alliances have been realized, so we don't know. My take on your question, Jack, is that Yair Lapid, if I were Yair Lapid, I would absolutely not bet on Benny Gantz. For the following reason, he knows, and well, no one really knows, but according to the polls, his party would still right now get about 10 seats. And Yair Lapid, like Moshe Kahalon's Kulanu, is situating itself in the center of the party space, which means that depending on whether Gantz or Netanyahu will lead the formation of the next government, being in the center, he should be conveniently and comfortably available as a coalition partner to either. He was in government before with Netanyahu, and being in the center is something that's extremely important to him. He comes back, Yair Lapid comes back to emphasizing the importance of being in the center for Yesh Atid time and time again. And I think that's the reason why. So for him to stay put is absolutely the rational and the right electoral strategy to do. Your second question was about where the voters would come from. Some of those voters will come from Chatnua, although those are not great in numbers, and some would come from the disillusioned labor voters. But we really don't know whether that would how that would pan out, because we started seeing more and more voters expressing their preference for the Labor Party. And it's possible that some of those Israeli voters who may have indicated their preference to Gantz in the previous weeks are now shifting back to Avoda. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. William. Jacob.
So my question concerns public opinion about security matters. How important is that to the general public?
Let me just put up a slide. Just go back quickly. I skipped over this slide. Yes, so I want to draw your attention in the context of the discussion about the New Right. In particular, I do want to bring this particular picture from one of the campaign videos of the New Right Party to your attention briefly. So Naftali Bennett certainly emphasizes the importance of security, and he argues that Benny Gantz, whom he considers a left-wing candidate, and it's not clear at all when you listen to Benny Gantz whether he really is a left-wing candidate and whether his party is really a left-wing party or not. But for Bennett, it's important to situate the conversation and the campaign that way. He argues that Benny Gantz's record as Chief of Staff, as Ramatkal, it was an indication of weakness. He is not someone to whom the Israeli national security interests should be trusted. And so when you look at some of the campaign literature that the New Right produces, you see a very, very strong emphasis on national security. Certainly national security also plays an important role in the campaign of Likud, where Netanyahu is positioning himself and the party positions him as a true defender and champion of the Israeli national interest in terms of defense and security. So it is very important. It's not without reason that the second largest party in the polls is led by Benny Gantz, who does come from the security establishment. I do want to say that since the departure of Ehud Barak, who certainly wasn't a successful politician in terms of, I mean, he was former prime minister, but a very short-lived prime minister. And eventually he split the Labour Party when he wasn't able to get the members of his party to follow him in the 18th Knesset. But the Labour Party has been really plagued by not having a credible bitachonist, not having a credible security person in a senior position in the party. And there is definitely an understanding that the Israeli left, the Labour Party in particular, seems to have abandoned the national security problem in terms of its messaging and in terms of its strategy. So much more about the platform of the Israeli Labour Party is about socio-economic, social justice, economically redistributive issues that national security seems to have fallen by the wayside. So to answer Jack's question in a way, the Benny Gantz phenomenon seems to try to repair that, seems to offer an alternative to Likud's very strong and electorally successful appeal to the security concerns, to say, hey, wait a minute, we have Benny Gantz here, an established, true and tried, decorated soldier, a former Ramatkal, whom you can trust. He's going to defend the country. Well, not according to Naftali Bennett, but that certainly is the appeal. So national security is very important, and it's precisely because of your question that we need to remember why it's important that Benny Gantz is a high-ranking former soldier who is leading now the major opposition to Likud.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. Yes, sir, of course. So there is no number, there's a percentage. So any political party that wants to be in the Knesset needs to receive a minimum of 3.25% of the valid votes cast. So 3.5 votes. If you look at the last election, that translated into about 170,000 votes approximately. But of course, it depends on turnout. As more people turn out, as more people cast valid votes, the number, the 3.25% of that is going to increase. Yeah, and that means roughly about 3 seats. Essentially, that threshold means that we are not going to be seeing political parties with. It's just a mathematical impossibility to see parties with fewer than 3 seats entering the Knesset. So that means that should mean less fragmentation. Yes. Yeah.
Carolyn Glick was an advisor to Bibi, and many of her columns could have been public relations columns on his behalf. She defended him, supported him, etc. In the last election, he had 2 positions he could have nominated. Some said she was being considered for one and then wasn't put on the list. What made her now join with Bennett and not talk to Bibi? Can I join you?
I have to admit that I didn't see that conversation. In other words, I didn't, so that's news to me, i.e. that Glick would have even considered the possibility of running with Netanyahu. So I can't answer the question on one foot, but I will actually try to get an interview with her on this trip, and if I do get it and do get the answer, I will report back. So let me, however, add something to your question, which you didn't ask about, but it gives me an opportunity to mention nonetheless. Oops, sorry. It's not only Caroline Glick, but Naftali Bennett, as well as Ayelet Shaked, they are also coming from the Netanyahu coterie, if you will. Naftali Bennett ran Netanyahu's Likud internal campaign when he replaced Ariel Sharon after he exited to form Kadima and became Likud the leader of the party. Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked were part of the Netanyahu political household. And had it not been for a personal falling out with the prime minister's, eventually prime minister's, the party leader's wife. Who knows? The two of them may have remained there a lot longer. So it's important to note that there is more of that connection connecting these individuals in the new right with Likud than what meets the eye. Which means that for them to be coalition partners in any kind of an arrangement in the future is certainly not an impossibility. While personally they may have fallen out, politically there is a very, very strong connection. So it's true of Glick, it's certainly true of Bennett as well as Ayelet Shaked. And it's true of Lieberman too. Avigdor Lieberman also, he was running at some point Netanyahu's cabinet. So the tentacles of the Netanyahu political household reach far and wide in the Israeli, on the Israeli right. Yes?
Naftali Bennett advocates the annexation of the West Bank. Area. What are you going to do with the rest of the West Bank?
But those are, one of them is under Palestinian control, the large cities, and one of them is under joint administration. So they don't want to touch. They really just want Area C to be annexed where the Jewish settlements are.
But what will happen with the rest of it? Become a second state? Or it remains under Israel control?
No, status quo. Status quo.
Uh-huh. Is that a similar policy of the Likud?
Thank you for the question. No. Likud is, as you've seen under the Prime Minister's leadership for the last 4 years, has been arguing that there is no partner to make a peace deal with. And so that remains. That is Likud policy. It's the status quo managing the conflict, at least until such time that President Trump rolls out his plan, his much-awaited plan about the Middle East. It's precisely because of the fear of what that plan may be that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked want to make sure that Area C will be annexed now before the Trump deal might make it impossible. So there is great hesitation and there's a great, perhaps fear is the wrong word because these politicians don't strike me that they would be fearful of anything, but there's not much trust, if you will, associated with what the Trump deal might offer to Israel when you listen to Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked. So they really want to move decisively now before it's too late. Yeah.
What's the percentage of the eligible voters who actually vote?
What's the percentage? So the electoral turnout, so it's back to the 70s, 70%. Okay. Yeah, there was a time when Israel adopted the direct election of the prime minister. So thereafter, the electoral system and the electoral behavior in Israel became very confused, and electoral turnout suffered. But it's back again to the high 60s, lower 70s. So it's a very healthy participation rate. Looking at Stu. Oh, okay, Stu is done. Yeah, any other questions? Yes, David.
What precisely transpired from Gantz's positions?
So the question is, what precisely has transpired from Gantz's positions? Well, we know that he doesn't want to give in to Haredi extortion, right? So he speaks a language about the Haredi sector that is reminiscent of Yair Lapid a couple of terms ago. And it's not without reason that as soon as he offered his opening campaign speech, the Haredi parties immediately said that we don't care what the outcome of the indictment, the potential indictment process against Benjamin Netanyahu might be. He is our favorite prime ministerial candidate. Never are we going to go into coalition with Benny Gantz. So that we know that he wants to change, and this is really the other important leg that of his pledge, if you will, that I feel comfortable commenting on. He's been very clear about changing the nation-state bill, the 14th Basic Law, which we discussed also in the previous class. You might remember this was the basic law that the Knesset legislated in the summer of 2018. And Benny Gantz wants to undo that, wants to make sure, or to amend it rather. He wants to make sure that the Israeli Arab community, the Israeli Arab sector, and its grievances are going to be addressed appropriately within the framework of an amended basic law. So, so you'll see that it's a very different package. It's a very different set of policies that he offers, which understandably makes Naftali Bennett say he is on the left, he is not in the center. Irvin.
Just very briefly, because you mentioned the last poll you looked at was February 13th, but the latest that has come out seems to support what you've been saying. Labor has gone from 8 to 10. The Bayit HaYehudi Jewish home is now above the threshold, and Gantz has lost 1 to 2 seats. So that's some of the dynamics may reflect what you've been saying.
Thank you very much. And indeed, public opinion polls everywhere, but in Israel certainly are very slippery. And so on March 25th, and I hope that many of you will consider coming back to join us for the third class, we will probably be in a more informed position to comment on this. So thank you very much, Irving, for bringing us up to date on where the Israeli public currently is. I don't see anybody jumping up and down. So, yes, madam, yeah.
No, I just want to get up and thank you very much for coming here this evening and sharing your knowledge with us. I feel badly that Stu had left, but I think it's important for all of us to know how much we appreciate your efforts and your enlightenment, and I think we're going out of here a little bit stronger in our knowledge about Israeli politics, and I'm hoping that Minka will come in. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think that puts a very beautiful and natural end to this evening. So thank you for coming. Stay warm, and God willing, see you on March 25th.